In my family, I think that trauma can be kind of tricky growing up with it and not learning until years later and you're an adult and educated that, oh wow, that was trauma.
My grades were Fs. I didn't care about school and I wanted to give up.
I hold a whole bunch of stuff in me and I'm very good at that. And at some point it would just poof.
Teachers recognize that their kids are dealing with anxiety and trauma and are hungry for strategies.
Most students come to school ready to learn. They adapt to class routines, handle the demands of schoolwork, and interact well with others. But in every school there are students who've experienced trauma. It can affect their ability to learn. Students may be unprepared to handle emotional and physical reactions that lead to disruptive behavior.
And if we don't take that into account from an educational perspective, from a systems perspective, we're going to lose out on a lot of opportunity to educate kids because all we're going to be dealing with is their behaviors.
Trauma is an intense physical or psychological stress reaction. 3 E's help define trauma. It is caused by an event or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as harmful and has lasting adverse effects on that person's well-being.
Trauma is about how you perceived the event that happened to you and your inability to be able to process that and move past that.
Trauma in our life has been a journey. Trauma looks like rages, out of control behavior, fit throwing, demanding, unexplained sorrow around certain anniversaries or dates.
Regardless of the kind of trauma or the causes of it, students may struggle with stress long afterward. Child traumatic stress occurs when children or adolescents have been exposed to traumatic events or situations that overwhelm their ability to cope.
A child that is acting out or showing signs of stress and that has been triggered really may have something deeper that has been happening to them.
We can't really talk about behavior in this area without looking at the trauma. We thought that it was really important that we start to integrate understanding what that means for a student.
Types of trauma can be organized by the experiences that cause them. Trauma can be caused by a single intense experience or multiple repeated experiences. Acute, chronic, and complex trauma occur within a larger context of historical systemic challenges. Service systems themselves may unintentionally contribute to trauma, and a person impacted by trauma may not even realize it.
When we talk about trauma, when we train and have discussions with families and with staff in our community, they think about a car accident. They think about a mass shooting. What they don't think about, what they don't see, are the children and families that suffer from physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, that have events happen within their home, within their family, within their community that they don't know how to deal with.
Over the last several decades, we've learned a lot about the impact of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and their relationship to trauma and traumatic stress. Research that began in the 1990s found a strong relationship between 10 experiences of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction in childhood, and health problems later in adulthood. The more adverse experiences an individual has in childhood, the higher the risk of chronic disease and mental illness as an adult.
Growing up with my parents, my mother was manic depressant, very clinically depressed. Eventually, I ended up working for a local social services, working with children in foster care, adoption, and post-adoptions. We talked about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and I remember the first time I took it, I was like, wow, I have a high ACEs score.
The brain is the one organ when we're born that's not fully developed, so it's going to be highly impacted by an environment. So if a child experiences a calm, nurturing, predictable environment, the brain's going to wire together one way. If the environment is very unpredictable and chaotic, it's going to wire in another way.
I get the tendency is to go, what's wrong with you? But the real question that should be asked is, what happened to you?
We were fortunate enough to have visited my twins in Guatemala when they were 8 months old, and we could visibly see that they had had signs of neglect that were critical in their development. And it actually explained a lot of their behaviors that we were seeing in the home.
One way that we conceptualize the experience of trauma and the experience of being triggered into that survival response is just a simple model with our hands. And if we take our thumb and wrap it in here, it's simply your downstairs brain. Most importantly, it's your amygdala, which is your fire alarm. And it lets me know when there's danger and sets off a cascade of events in my body that lets me react and respond to that danger. Then if I take my fingers and wrap them down here, it covers my downstairs brain. This is my upstairs brain. All sorts of beautiful things happen up here. Relationship building, problem solving, learning, and I want that to be there. I want that to be the filter so my downstairs brain stays in check. Every once in a while, when I get triggered, for good reason or bad, I flip my lid.
Boom, or pop off, or explode. The only time I do that is if I'm holding in so much. Sometimes it will come out in tears, or I'll just go crazy.
And one of the biggest precipitating factors of someone flipping their lid is anxiety. So not knowing what to expect next.
So if every night when I'm going to bed, I'm worried about my safety. The problem is the more often that happens on an ongoing basis, I can't turn that off. So now at 10 o'clock when I'm in the school setting, I don't feel safe because I don't ever feel safe.
And from our teacher's point of view, trauma impact looks like basically the fight, flight, or freeze. Do I have students in my class who act up because their behavior is triggered either by internal stressors or by challenges in the classroom?
So with my kids, the triggers that we've noticed so far are close proximity. So if a child comes up and grabs them and hugs them, as children do at around 8 or 9 years old, they explode. They immediately melt down. They begin acting out aggressively.
Some students might have very big behaviors where they get really aroused. They might start to get in fights or have other problems with peers. And other kids might kind of more fly under the radar or kind of check out, seem like they're not involved or they're unmotivated or don't care.
School is focused obviously on learning and academics, and if you're still trying to survive in the world you're in, to learn on top of that is really impossible.
In the beginning of the year, I didn't want to try at all. I just wanted to get through the school year and be done. So I was like not really there, but there.
When you're caught in that mode of having to be in survival mode, you can't also be in a growth mode. And so that inhibits your ability to learn, to take in information, because a lot of your energy is going to paying attention to the environment around you.
A student responds in a completely different way when they understand the why. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not a bad kid. But I've been through something that's impacted me in the way that I see things, the way that I learn, the way that I react, respond. And now I understand a little bit more.
One thing that I've learned to counteract trauma is having an adult in your life that's constant and that is supportive throughout your childhood and your life. I had my father who was always there, and I had my grandmother. Even though I do feel like I have a pretty elevated ACEs score, it doesn't mean that there's not the resiliency in you or those protective factors that counterbalance that.
My grades were Fs. I didn't care about school, and I wanted to give up. And now it's A's and B's and C's, and me trying harder to graduate. I started to see my grades change, and I was like, wow, if I had actually tried in the beginning of the year, maybe we would be on a better road. And it was just all changing, and it felt great.
Getting to the point where things feel great can take time and patience from students, families, school personnel, and others. Knowing about childhood trauma and its impact helps in the classroom, and it helps in life. And there are ways to counteract the effect of childhood traumatic experiences. Doing that starts with understanding trauma and a willingness to use that knowledge to help at home and in the classroom.